So, the subject matter of the Last Supper is, as we know, Christ's final meal before he's taken away and crucified. And this particular scene that Leonardo has chosen to paint of the Last Supper is at the moment where Christ tells his apostles that one of you will betray me. And it causes a ripple of shock throughout the group. We can see very clearly Christ is in the center, and the apostles are all gasping and in shock, and there's a very physical reaction, an emotional reaction to what he has said, the horror and disbelief that Christ would say, one of you is going to betray me. And of course, we do know that it will be Judas who will betray him very shortly after the Last Supper. And Judas is probably the only one of the apostles there who isn't reacting in that kind of a gasp and horror, as you'll have seen. Make sure you watch the video link at the top, the Khan Academy. The Last Supper, it's an excellent, as all of the Khan Academy videos are, an excellent look at the mural itself. In one of the Gospels, there is a quote, a line where Christ supposedly says something along the lines of, "He who dips his hand in the same bowl of water as me will be the one who betrays me," basically. And you'll have noticed from the video, the close-up, when you could see a close-up of the mural, that both Judas and Christ are simultaneously reaching towards a bowl to dip their hands into it. They're not quite doing it, but it's just alluding to that line in the Gospel. Also, Leonardo is identifying which one of the apostles is Judas for us. Leonardo also simultaneously depicts Christ blessing the bread and saying to his apostles, "Take this, eat, this is my body," and blessing the wine and saying, "Drink it from it, all of you, for this is my blood, which is poured out for the forgiveness of sins." These are all, again, quotations from the Bible and things that Leonardo has alluded to in his depiction of the Last Supper. The words of the founding moment of the sacrament of the Eucharist, the miraculous transformation of the bread and the wine into the body and blood of Christ. So we're on to techniques now and composition. Composition. The scene shows us figures in a rectangular room. I mean, we've talked before about the use of linear and aerial perspective here, and it's got to be one of the classic examples. The room terminates at 3 windows on the end of the wall. Through the windows, we can see a beautiful landscape setting. The balanced composition, it's balanced because obviously there's more or less the same amount of characters on either side. Everything is mirrored from one side to another. If you draw a line down through Christ, it's almost a mirror images on both sides. The mirror image is anchored by a triangle formed by Christ's body, and we know again that Leonardo da Vinci was very fond of this pyramidal type of composition. He sits below an arching pediment that if completed traces a circle. Okay, so if you completed that arch and continued it on and continued the circle, it would create almost a halo-like shape behind Christ. Christ is in the center of this circle, and he is among the apostles, and his body forms a triangular-like shape which is not overlapped by any of the apostles. There are 4 sets of 3 apostles at the table beside Christ, and these numbers may have been important for Leonardo for symbolic reasons. For example, there are 4 Gospels in the Bible, and there are 3 in the number of the Trinity. And what they mean by there then is the Trinity, and you'll remember this from Masaccio's Holy Trinity. The Trinity is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, the dove. So as we said already, there are 4 groups of apostles, 3 groups, 3 in each group. And within those groups, they are interlinked as well with their hand gestures and emotions. The various apostles are linked by their hand movements. There's a huge array of emotions depicted on the faces of the apostles. They range from protest, who is Philip, who's number 8 on the apostles, to sadness, John, who sits next to Christ, to acceptance, who's Christ himself. He has an expression of resigned sadness. Judas, however, who we can see here in the picture, is in shadow compared to the others. He's darker, it's a duller, he's completely different to all the others, so that we can only see a part of his face while he clutches the money bag containing the silver pieces, and we know that they were the 40 pieces of silver that he received from Herod's army for betraying Christ and showing them where they could find him in order to take him away and crucify him. Judas was normally, in past times, Judas was normally arranged across the table. So in previous depictions by other artists of the Last Supper, Judas is usually placed completely apart, physically apart, wouldn't be included with the group at all. He's often placed on one side of the table, and all the other apostles are placed on the other side of the table. Leonardo doesn't do that. He places Judas within the group, but it's very obvious that Judas is completely different to all of the rest. Judas was normally arranged across the table from the other apostles in other Last Supper depictions, but here he is depicted in the same grouping as John and Peter. Peter, and you can see this, is clutching a knife in his hand, and he leans forward to John and seems to whisper in his ear. This action seems to isolate Judas even more from the group, so not only is he's not included at all within the group, because of obviously he's going to be the one that betrays. Technique. We can easily see Leonardo's use of one-point linear perspective, in which the vanishing point is at Christ's head. The orthogonals can be seen by following the tops of the walls, tapestries, or the coffers. Don't forget the coffers are those square panels in the roof, to where they intersect at Christ. We also know he is framed by the pediment. The pediment is that arched window above, and he's backlit by the open window. So, I mean, Leonardo is using many techniques to show us. In particular, we can be in no doubt who the important person is in this painting. Leonardo was keeping up with the innovative artistic techniques developed in the early Renaissance, and of course we do know that. We also see how the landscape in the background terminates in a kind of a misty grey, so we have the aerial perspective coming in here. This painterly technique, in which the horizon's colour becomes more dull and colourless, is called aerial perspective, and was used by Renaissance artists to create the illusion of depth in the landscape scenes. Now, I know you know all that already, but it's just there to remind you yet again. Painting techniques. So we know this was a fresco, and you know we've looked many times already at the technique of fresco making, and we have buon fresco and we have fresco secco, so keep that in mind again. Leonardo was a slow and careful painter. Leonardo had a preference for oil painting. It allowed him time to paint in fine detail. He didn't like fresco, he didn't like buon fresco, or fresco secco I should say, because you had to work quickly. Remember we talked about the giornata and how a patch of plaster was prepared each day for an artist to work on. So they had to work quickly. They had to work in order to get the paint, to get the pigment onto the wet plaster before it dried. Leonardo was dissatisfied with fresco work as it dried too quickly. So that's why the likes of oil paint suited Leonardo, because it takes longer to dry and he could achieve what he wanted to achieve. He was instead, Leonardo sought out a greater detail and luminosity that could not be achieved with traditional fresco. He covered the wall. So in this case, with the Last Supper, he covered the wall with a double layer of dried plaster. So that's buon fresco. Then, borrowing from panel painting, he added an undercoat of lead white paint to enhance the brightness of the oil and tempera paint, which he applied on top. And I'm sure it was magnificent. It's still magnificent, but it has deteriorated hugely, because we know that paint applied to plaster needs to be really, for the longevity, needs to be done on the fresco secco, wet damp plaster. He didn't do that. He kind of tried to combine fresco techniques and painting techniques, and the difficulty was it started to deteriorate very quickly afterwards. And some people say it deteriorated very shortly afterwards. Some people say it was even beginning to deteriorate before he had finished the piece itself. This experimental technique Leonardo used allowed for huge detail and extraordinary precision and amazing humanist style of motion to be painted. But it was painted, the wall of the refectory was a thin exterior wall, and as we said already, the paint failed to adhere and it began to deteriorate very soon, if not even before completion. But subject, so you can see here in this little close-up of part of the mural, the fresco, the deterioration, and this would be a fairly recent photo. You can see yourself when you're there, the deterioration. I think what didn't help as well then, not only was it the technique that Leonardo da Vinci used, which kick-started the deterioration of the mural, but also in later years, like 100 years later, when they realised the significance, when Leonardo da Vinci became known as the master we know him today, somebody in their wisdom hung a huge tapestry or curtain in front of the mural on the wall in order to protect it. They felt they were protecting it, but in actual fact what happened then was that moisture and condensation built up between the wall and this curtain fabric barrier that they'd held up and caused even more deterioration. So now when you go to see this mural, you're only allowed into the room. The room is completely temperature controlled. There's a door which they open very briefly. You enter into a small lobby. That door closes behind you. The door in front of you opens and you go in, and you're inside in the what would have been the refectory, and the Last Supper is there in front of you. You're allowed 20 minutes only per group, no more than 30 people in the group, because if they crowded it with people crowded in there, obviously the temperature will rise, and they have now, scientists have decided the optimum temperature to preserve what is there and to hopefully avoid any further deterioration. At the end of your 20 minutes, that group exits through another door which is sealed behind them. They're in a lobby. You wait for 5 seconds or something, and then the door in front of you opens and you exit that way. So that's how they control the temperature now, in order to preserve the what is there and to hopefully avoid any future deterioration. So Leonardo da Vinci's depiction in the Last Supper of the human figure, as with all of his work, really, the human figure, but you can often be asked in a question to describe one of the things, how he dealt with the human figure. Leonardo painted stunningly realistic figures, and they show his love of nature and human anatomy, and really could apply this paragraph to all of his paintings. He dissected bodies and studied the physical proportions of humans. His sketchbooks show a fascination with facial expression, but in his paintings he sought to portray the perfect, ideal human figure. Leonardo was one of the first Renaissance artists to exclude the halo over the divine characters. Instead, he used his knowledge of the human figure and techniques such as sfumato and chiaroscuro to create a sense of godlikeness or divinity within his characters. And really, that passage is worth learning because it can apply to any of his religious paintings that he's done. So the Virgin on the Rocks, and also this one. Leonardo da Vinci is very well known for his painting of portraits. He wouldn't necessarily, again, as we said about Leonardo da Vinci, it wasn't his first love. Painting wasn't certainly, and certainly painting portraits wasn't. But I'd say we could probably assume he had to do it because he required it financially. He needed to earn a living. Also, a lot of his paintings were commissions from the Duke of Milan, and he was his patron, and he was more or less his boss, so he did what he was told. So there are actually, probably be surprised if you discovered how many portraits of Leonardo da Vinci's are famous, but I suppose none so famous as the Mona Lisa. Now we're going to look at two. We're going to look at the Mona Lisa, and we're going to look at the lady with the ermine. But there are many, many more. The Mona Lisa obviously is the most famous. Now I want you to pause here, please, and follow that video link to the Khan Academy website and Leonardo da Vinci and the Mona Lisa, and have a look at that again, because as always they show a fantastic up close view and analysis of the painting. When you've that done, come back here and we continue on. The Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci, it is an oil painting on poplar wood. The subject is of a young woman, and this painting, as we know, is in the museum, the Louvre in Paris. Elements of the Mona Lisa include the half-length figure with a three-quarter turn towards the viewer, and the balustrade with pillars seen behind, connecting the foreground with the landscape. Okay, so we're looking at this young woman. She is sitting, she is turned one way, and her head, her body and shoulders are slightly turned, and her face is facing forward. Pyramidal again in shape. We'll see this pose quite often with Leonardo. It's one he likes. Obviously, it's one he thinks it works, which I'm sure it does. She's in the foreground. The figure is very much in the foreground, and she's gazing straight at us. There's a kind of a mythical landscape in the background. Again, a bit like the Virgin of the Rocks. I suppose you could liken it to that. Not somewhere we really know specifically, nowhere specific. I'm not sure if you can see it in this picture, but you will have seen it in the video, that there is a balustrade. That's kind of like a railing, a stone railing behind her. So she's obviously on a balcony. We can see she's elevated above the landscape behind her. And this depiction of the painting in the foreground and the landscape in the background is derived from the Florentine tradition of portrait painting. So it's something that Leonardo would have taken from the past and used himself. The placement of the sitter close to the picture plane, by that I mean the foreground, heightens the sense of the figure's presence, while her position high above a receding landscape conveys an incredible sense of spatial depth and distance. The atmospheric intensity achieved through the sfumato technique of the painting is also highly innovative and adds to the sense of mystery that pervades every element of this painting. And we know Leonardo really has been credited with, if not discovering sfumato, certainly with the mastery of it. Mona Lisa's smile has intrigued scholars for centuries, and its true meaning continues to elude us. It is important to note, however, that the sitter's expression matches contemporary views on feminine charm. The beauty of a contented, modest female smile was a reflection of a woman's beauty, and therefore also her virtue. So it was kind of standard practice to portray a woman in that manner, with this small hint of a smile, I suppose. It was modest, and it was considered to be a symbol of her beauty and virtue. The evocative impact of the portrait is due to the pictorial light that pervades the landscape and which causes the subject to stand out from her setting. In the Mona Lisa, Leonardo achieves an unprecedented impression of realism, particularly in the fresh tones of the face and hands, evoking the life and presence of the sitter in a way that has rarely been achieved by other painters. The subject matter. The painting is thought to be a portrait of Lisa Gherardini, who was the wife of Francesco del Giocondo, a wealthy Florentine silk merchant. The painting is oil on white wood, white poplar wood, and it is believed to have been painted between 1503 and 1506. However, Leonardo may have continued working on it as late as 1517, so we don't really know. But there is certainly a story, whether it's true or not, that it took him a very long time to finish his paintings. The painting is thought to have been commissioned by the couple for their new home and to celebrate their birth of their son Andrea. And I have a link here, a video link here, to a very interesting little clip about the painting. So please have a look at that. Composition and style. The portrait shows the subject sitting upright and sideways in a chair, with her face and chest turned slightly towards the viewer, a posture derived from the pyramid shape used to depict a sitting Madonna. And of course we've seen that in Leonardo's Virgin of the Rocks. Her left arm sits comfortably on the armrest of the chair and is clasped by the hand of her right arm, which crosses her front. The slightly protective pose or position of her arms, as well as the armrest, create a sense of distance between the sitter and the viewer. So it's like a barrier between us and her. The figure is shown seated in a loggia, I think it's pronounced, or a room with at least one open side. What they mean is open to the open air. So there's one side of the room is open to the exterior. Behind her is a hazy and seemingly isolated landscape imagined by the artist. It gives the composition significant depth, although its details reveal a clear imbalance between the higher rocky horizon to the right compared to the lower flatlands stretching away on the left. This imbalance adds to the slightly surreal atmosphere of the painting. The face is the focal point of the painting, and we see the face straight on, and there's balance created as we view equal amounts of the face on either side of the nose. It's a very balanced composition, let's say. Secondly, her gaze, which is directed to the right of the viewer, is not looking directly at us. Created by one of the greatest artists in the history of art, the Mona Lisa is a wonderful example of high Renaissance painting. Techniques. The background landscape behind the sitter was created using aerial perspective, with its smoky blues and no clearly defined vanishing point. The painting is created in oil paint on wood poplar panel. We've said that already, so it'll be painting techniques. So there'll be the whole cartoon technique to be mentioned. Again, if you're unsure about that, go back and look at the video on High Renaissance techniques and your notes. The use of colour in the background forms horizontal bands, so there are bands of colour. The varying widths of these bands add visual interest to the composition. A subtle effect of the diminishing width of the bands towards the top reinforces the effect of perspective on the background. So what they mean by that, go back and have a close look at this photograph. There are bands of darker browns and greens, larger bands, but the bands are being almost like stripes of colour that are gradually become different colours up to the blues, the greys, and eventually towards the very light in the horizon. The bands of colour become smaller, and again that contributes to the effect and the impression of distance. The Mona Lisa exemplifies Leonardo da Vinci's contribution to the art of oil painting in the High Renaissance, namely his mastery of sfumato. This painterly technique involves the smooth, almost imperceptible transition from one colour to another by means of ultra-subtle tonal graduations. Evident throughout the painting, Leonardo's use of sfumato is particularly visible in the soft contouring of Lisa Girandini's face around the eyes and the mouth. It is a technique of oil painting that he had already demonstrated with great success in the Virgin of the Rocks, and also in another painting which is called The Lady of the Ermine, which is what we are going to look at, the next painting we're going to look at. Just another point that often comes up regarding the Mona Lisa, that is the slightly surreal feature when we look at the Mona Lisa, and it's often talked about, is her apparent lack of eyebrows and eyelashes. So that kind of gives her an unusual, strange look. Just to note that this wasn't a deliberate act that Leonardo decided. He did not decide to paint her without eyebrows and eyelashes. In actual fact, he did paint her with eyebrows and eyelashes, but for whatever colour pigment he used has faded or was removed during cleaning or something, but technology today can scan and use ultraviolet and all sorts of things, X-ray, to see that there was in actual fact she did have eyebrows and eyelashes, which would have given her maybe that less of a sort of a wide-eyed startle appearance that we see today. So when and if you were discussing the Mona Lisa, and you need to just some key points there, you need to make sure you mention the pyramidal composition, the use of perspective, linear, atmospheric perspective, sfumato, chiaroscuro, and her expressions and gestures. I've just listed 2 exam questions there. One of them is from 2019. Leonardo da Vinci comes up frequently enough, usually every 3 or 4 years. In general, in the Lebenscert exam art history paper, there will be one of the high Renaissance artists. So it could be Michelangelo, it could be Raphael, it could be Leonardo, it could be Titian, it could be Botticelli. We don't know, but in general there's 1, if not 2 questions annually on the work of the artist, one of those painters in the high Renaissance period, because it was such a significant period in art history. Now, I have seen an exam question come up on the Mona Lisa, and they'll ask you to discuss another portrait of Leonardo da Vinci's, so that's why I'm including here the lady with an ermine. We're just going to go down through it fairly quickly. Have a look at that video link, which is there. Again, it's always an excellent idea to look at these videos first, I believe, and maybe again afterwards, because you're going to get a close-up look at these paintings that I can't give you here, or that you're not going to get from your textbook. And really, it's as good as it's the closest you're going to see these paintings, or it's the best depiction of them you're going to get, short of standing in front of them yourself, which obviously isn't possible. This portrait, lady with an ermine. The ermine is the little creature there. It's kind of a stoat-like creature. It's a picture of a young girl who, I'll read down through it now in a second. There's no need for me to say it again. It's painted. It was oil on wood panel again, as often is the case with Leonardo's paintings. Subject: the masterpiece. This masterpiece of Renaissance art is one of a handful of portraits completed by Leonardo da Vinci. It's known to be about 10 of them. It was commissioned by Lodovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, and again his name comes up time and time again for us when we talk about Leonardo da Vinci. We know he was Leonardo's painting, and Leonardo worked for him during the period from 1482 to 1499. The lady in this case is actually a 16-year-old girl. Her name is Cecilia Gallerini, reputedly the Duke's favourite mistress. The oil painting is executed on a walnut wood panel, primed with a layer of white gesso and brown underpaint. Again, now this is where you would mention this in technique. The original background of bluish grey was repainted during the mid-19th century for some reason, and the painting shows a half-length figure of a girl turned at a 3/4 angle to her right, but with her face turned to the left. She is gazing at something or someone in the distance off to the right. In her arm she holds a small greyish animal referred to in the title as Ermine, but also called a stoat. She is dressed in a fairly simple tunic with her hair bound and plaited, and you'll have seen that in the video, much better view of the painting than what we have here. And ermine was very popular for its skin, for its pelt. They have a pure white fur, which was very desirable back in the day. Lady with an ermine examples several techniques of high Renaissance painting. Firstly, Leonardo's mastery of chiaroscuro, his use of sfumato, and the technique he used a similar technique used in the Mona Lisa. Third, X-ray and microscopic examination of the picture has revealed a preparatory drawing delineated in charcoal, and we know that's called a cartone, on the undersurface, a technique that Leonardo absorbed in the workshop of his teacher Andrea del Verrocchio. Laboratory analysis has also uncovered Leonardo's fingerprints in the surface of the paint, proving he used his fingers to blend paint. Can I just say, whenever you're talking technique, please do make reference to the notes you have on higher Renaissance techniques for the paintings. That there's a section in each. There's a painting for sculpture, there's a section for fresco, and there's a section for bronze casting, and here there's also a section for painting. So please be familiar with all of those, because no matter what question you ask, you're going to be asked about what question you answer, you're going to be asked about the technique, and it's important that you know it and you have your facts right. Composition. As you know, Leonardo's did the paintings, and the example we're giving here is the Virgin of the Rocks. The Lady with an Ermine contains a pyramidal structure, with the sitter captured in the act of turning to her left, while the ermine turns to the right, reflecting Leonardo's keen interest in the dynamic effects of movement. And again, when I think of movement, I think the exemplary painting fresco of the Last Supper highlights Leonardo da Vinci's fascination and interest in movement, with all of the apostles moving, and the whole action is just, the whole painting fresco itself is action everywhere. This painting is also an excellent illustration of Leonardo's anatomical expertise. Cecilia's exposed right hand, for instance, is painted in great detail. Each wrinkle around her knuckles, each fingernail, even the flexed tendon in her forefinger is depicted with painstaking accuracy, as is the beauty spot on her right cheek. Almost every strand of fur around the ermine's right ear is individually replicated. Modern analysis has shown us that originally there was a window appeared on the right hand side of the picture, but was later deleted. We're assuming it was Leonardo da Vinci that deleted it. Symbolism. The ermine is included in the portrait, we believe, for several symbolic reasons. To begin with, the ermine in its white winter fur, the ermine was a traditional symbol of purity. In his notebooks, Leonardo da Vinci compiled copious notes on numerous animals, one of which was the ermine. He seemed to have particular interest in that. He praises the ermine for its moderation and its purity. It seems, therefore, that the creature was included as an allusion to Cecilia's purity and moderation. In addition, it also alluded to Ludovico's, the Duke of Milan, who had been a member of the Order of the Ermine and used the animal as a personal heraldic emblem. So for his coat of arms, he had an ermine on it. This, in conjunction with Cecilia's gaze, gives Ludovico an invisible but important presence in the picture, an understandable response to a generous painting. So what we're saying there is that perhaps she is obviously gazing with a loving look, for want of a better word, at somebody who is in the distance, and perhaps the ermine, and that was to allude that it was Ludovico himself she was looking at. Leonardo, as I've said a couple of times now, is quite famous for his portraits, and just below here are a name of some of the different portraits he has, which you can look up yourself if you want to. Portrait of a musician, Leonardo da Vinci will find it for you. Portrait of a woman, we know that that one is the Mona Lisa, among others. There's the head of a woman, and there's also a portrait of St. John the Baptist. In his subtlety and grace of his figure painting, Leonardo remains unequalled. That's a statement you can either agree or disagree with yourself.